Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Education Matters. Here, my name is Jim O'Connell, and you're very welcome. The call-in number, which should be on the screen, but if you're watching live, it's 603-640-3091. That's 640-3091. Love to have you. It's March 20th, Tuesday, March 20th. If you're, as I say, if you're live, if you're watching right now, it's Tuesday afternoon at 6 o'clock. And I hope you're not at, there was originally meant to be a redistricting meeting on tonight at Hillside Middle School, which has been postponed. It's been postponed for more than a week. But the next one on the redistricting thing for the public to come and offer their opinions and etc. will be at McLaughlin Middle School tomorrow night, March 21st, from 5 to 6 p.m. If you're interested in that. So a lot of things going on, ladies and gentlemen. We're into we've seen the first numbers for the budget for this coming year. We'll see where things pop out, but I'd like to get into that. I'd like to get into that in a second. There's a couple of things I did want to mention. One is that I think it's important. I guess one of the big things this week is the passing of Coach Stone. A young father with a daughter who's a senior at Central High School about to graduate, who died very suddenly this past week. And though I couldn't make it myself, some of my family members were there at his service this weekend, and I'm told it rightfully it was a wonderful commemoration of his life, and a huge number of people showed up, which is an indication of the man's standing in the community. And while I didn't know him myself, I know of him and of the people around him. So I'd like to add my voice to those who commiserate with his family. I know there's an event going on this week called Lace 'Em Up. As I understand it, it's going to be a game at JFK. It may be tomorrow night. But it's going to be a game between Central and Memorial hockey teams, and it's a fundraiser, and so the funds are going to go to assist his family. And I don't have the exact details in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow night, Wednesday. In any case, I didn't want that to pass without recognizing it. The other thing was that another thing that happened this week, which was great for the city. A local company, well, they're a national company, but here locally, BJ's Wholesale funded all the Donors Choose requests that were online from Manchester schools and teachers, etc. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, teachers can go online nowadays to a site called Donors Choose. It's like GoFundMe, but they put in and say that they want to get a new whatever it is set of books or whatever they might need for their classroom, and individuals can go in and add a few dollars to that online through the internet. And not for the first time, actually. This is not the first time they know of BJ's, but other companies have done it in the past. BJ's came in this week and funded every request that had been put online by any teachers or schools in the city, and I was told that it was $40,000 worth of benefits. So kudos to them, and we continue to see private companies stepping up and helping out with the funding of our schools. Sadly, we find ourselves in that condition because of the way in which our schools are funded. I have to tell you that I read a piece on the Union Leader over the last few days, and they've been talking about schools, and it's bothered me quite a bit. And I'll start with the earlier article that was on the paper earlier, which had. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, so which date was this? It was this week, but it might have been the Sunday paper. Let me see if it has the date on the top of it here. March 17th, good old St. Patrick's Day. And of course, I'm wearing my, which side is it on? There you go. I'm wearing my Ireland shirt today because last week we didn't have a show because we got snowed out, so the previous show was run for 2 weeks. As many of you know, this program gets repeated numerous times during the week. So we didn't have a show last week. St. Patrick's Day is March 17th, and we had it was amazing. I went downtown, and my son and I were going to go out and with my wife and you know, celebrate for a little bit in the afternoon, and every bar on Elm Street and all the way down to Murphy's Tavern, up to right up to the Rover and down to the Strange Brew, and everybody in between had lines outside the door, long lines in some cases. And this was like, I'm guessing it was about 2:30 or about 2:30, maybe 2 o'clock on Saturday lunchtime. So, you know, not the peak time for all of that. So good old St. Patrick, you know, he's still able to pull out the crowd. So I'm sure I heard of nothing untoward. So it seemed like everybody was having a great time. Now, as you probably know, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you now, you know, next weekend here in Manchester, the St. Patrick's Day parade is always on after St. Patrick's Day. And the reason for that is so that it doesn't clash with the other parades that are on, and so that bands and groups are available to take part. So this coming Sunday, which will be the 24th, the St. Patrick's Day parade will be on here in Manchester. Sorry, the 25th. Sunday the 25th, the St. Patrick's Day Parade will be on in Manchester, and it's always a great time on Elm Street. Lots of bands and floats and lots of things for kids, young and old, and some of us older kids too. But it's, you know, you don't have to be Irish, it helps, but on a day like that, all are welcome. I'm obviously biased, but that's a great day. Lots of fun is had, and the wonderful thing from businesses in Manchester's, from their point of view, is that they get sort of a double whammy here, double benefit in that people go out and celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and then they have the following week, which is the St. Patrick's Day parade. So good on the my fellow brothers at the Ancient Order of Hibernians have been organising this parade for many years now, and it brings lots of people, both in terms of participants, that's a big number who come onto the streets of Manchester. Some people stay here because they come from further away. Lots of families come from outside the city and line the parade route, and so it's beside being a big Irish festival, it's a wonderful boon to the economy of the city. And so this is what small groups of volunteers can do. So my kudos to my brethren at the Ancient Order of Hibernians. So that's next week's event. So if you're looking for me on Sunday, I'll be on Elm Street. So let me go back to matters about our schools. So last week there was a number of pieces done on the Union Leader talking about our schools, and it kind of got a little. I thought it got a little lost because it was covering lots of different topics, and I want to concentrate on the primary issue here. And one of the things, there's a table that's on the at the end of the article, which has the snapshot of the elementary schools and the high schools in the state of New Hampshire. There are about 160 school districts. So for each of these tables, it has the 10 most costly districts, or that's their way of putting it. You have to be careful of the nomenclature here, right? So they're saying the 10 districts that spend the most per pupil out of the 160 or 165. The top one is Waterville Valley. They spend $42,000 per student. Think about that number. That is a very big number. The next, and they're an outlier because. The next highest is Jackson with 27,000, Monroe with 24, Moultonborough 27, Cornish 24, Rumney, Errol, Freedom, Harrisville, and Stratford 25. So those from 25 to 42. Let's take the 42 out as an outlier. 25 to 27 is the cost per pupil, and then it has test scores next to that, but I'm leaving out the test scores for now. And then the districts with that's at the elementary school level, and then at the high school level, the amount of money spent per pupil at the high school level. The school that spends the most is Sunapee High School at 25,100 per pupil. Moultonborough at 24,800. I don't know why that's written at Lincoln Woodstock back to 25,000. Interlakes 23. Muscogum Valley, Littleton, Hinsdale, Haverhill, Pittsburgh. They're inverted. Sorry, why did they do that? So that in this case, the district that's spending the most, the list is inverted. How crazy is that? Anyway, because they're doing it on average scores on the other side. So it's Pittsburgh is the one they have here. Sorry, this is an average score table. I apologize. The average test scores running from 569.3 average down to 437. We can't get into that just because the figures won't mean anything to you until you sort of look at a lot more details. Let's stick with the money for now. So Pittsburgh spending 31,767 per student. Now, if we look at the school districts that spend the least, now the way in which the union leader put this on the newspaper was interesting, was because they ran it. It says the 10 least costly school districts, and it goes from 1 to number 10. And in this case, 10 is the school district that spends less than everybody else. But usually the list would work differently. Manchester's at the bottom of the list. Manchester spends on the high schools 12,275, and then on the list on the elementary side, again, out of the 160 some school districts, Manchester is the school district that spends $11,591 dollars per student. So 11,000 versus the 20s that we see elsewhere. And then if you the state average is around 16,000 now. So we are once again at the bottom. And I'm highlighting that because I've used a couple of measurements regularly and often over the years to hold people's attention, to grab their attention, and to keep people concentrated on the bottom line. And the bottom line in Manchester is we continue once again. It's an extraordinary feat to be the lowest, the absolute lowest, out of 160 some. And to be at, and others are, they might be lower in one place from other towns and higher than another, but we own the lowest place across the numbers for the town that spends the least amount of money per student. And in the light of this, we have a school board that decides that it will accept cuts to our school district again next year because it's going to try and it says it needs to meet the tax cap in the city of Manchester. So I was quoted in the newspaper this week on these topics, and it made it appear what was quoted in there was true, because I said to the reporter who I spoke with, I talked about what the $2 million over the amount approved by Mayor Gatzis. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen actually overrode not the tax cap, but his budget, and gave Dr. Vargas $2 million extra dollars. And I described a list of things that just that $2 million was able to do, that we were able to put. In the article it says nurses. It was actually health teachers. So 4 health teachers, 1 in each of the 4 middle schools, and so I didn't list those. So it seemed when you read the article that, and it's right in here, it mentions someplace where it says that let me see, it mentions that O'Connell praised actions by city officials who last year devoted $2 million towards elementary schools. 8 extra teachers were hired, and that's not. It was $2 million extra, not just towards elementary schools, but 8 extra teachers were hired into the elementary schools, as were, it says here, nurses. It was actually healthcare teachers at the middle schools. The 2 resource officers that were going to be eliminated at our middle schools were not. And again, it says here a foreign language program was added to our middle schools. Well, a foreign language program was not added to our middle schools. What we got was, after an unconscionable absence of 4 or 5 years when we eliminated all foreign languages from our middle schools and downsized them in our high schools. So over the last 5 or 6 years, the poor children of Manchester ended up without a languages in middle schools because we as a population decided not to fund it. So what we did do was we hired one Spanish teacher with the one language is Spanish. Other schools have multiple, other districts have multiple choices, but in this case we now have Spanish. But we hired one teacher for the 900 or 850 to 900 kids at each of our middle schools. So even if all the kids in our middle schools wanted to do Spanish, they couldn't. There isn't enough. There's only one teacher. That teacher, he or she, has only got so many, places they can be at any one time. So, but at least I was grateful for that. It was a step in the right direction. My point in the conversation that I was having at the time was that the difference in the article, it talked about two New Hampshire cities it says two New Hampshire cities in bottom 10 for school spending, and those two cities were Nashua and Manchester. Now, Nashua spends $1,000 a student more than we do, and we have 14,500 students. If we spent just what Nashua spent, and remember, they're in the bottom 10 out of 160. If we were to spend what Nashua spent, we would have an additional $15 million or $14.5 million to spend. And my point that wasn't made clear here, my point was with the addition of the $2 million last year, we were able to do some of this postage stamp stuff and do some of the things that needed to be done because of the problems and the holes and gaps we had in our school offering. When asked about, if we, imagine what would happen if we spent what Nashua spent, well, with $15 million extra dollars, the rough calculation is it's around 20 teachers per million, fully paid teachers per million. That's teachers along with their costs and benefits, etc., for incoming teachers. So, think about that, right? So $10 million would give you 200 teachers. $15 million would give us 300 teachers. So if we were to spend just what they spend in Nashua, which is in the bottom 10, but not at the bottom of the bottom 10, that would be enough money to hire 300 teachers. What would we do with 300 teachers? And that's, of course, if you spent it all just on teachers. But we don't intend to do any of that. What we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, is I was deeply disappointed watching the last school board meeting because a budget, once again, was passed over to the aldermen, the board mayor and aldermen, for their approval. Because in the end, the school board just gets to ask for what it says it wants, and then the board mayor and alderman decides what they're going to give them. And I was very unhappy to see that the school district didn't ask for a level funding budget. In other words, take last year's programs, whatever we have in place today, and say this is what to hold everything that we have without giving up anything. We need this amount of money, and we didn't do that. So we're already with the budget that we sent over to City Hall, to the board mayor and alderman. Under that budget, we're going to have to lose, I don't know whatever the number is, 12 to 15 teachers through attrition. In other words, or through people who are retiring, in other words, non-rehires. So there won't be any pink slipping, it looks like. We don't know any of these things for certain yet, but it's most likely there won't be. But we will lose teachers, and we lost teachers last year. Now, even with the adding back in of the $2 million, I think there was a net loss of 4 or 5 teachers because we didn't hire most of the people who retired. And what we did do was my phone's going nuts here. What we did do was we hired those 8 elementary teachers, etc. So once again, we're starting off from behind the 8 ball. And I have to say that, I was at loggerheads with our previous administration, with the previous mayor, for many years on this issue, which was that what the school board should be doing is saying, laying out, this is what, for the alderman, this is what the school board requires in order to maintain the already inadequate services that we're offering the children of Manchester. And therefore, a number should go over to the alderman, and let the alderman, if they want to be so callous or cruel or unthinking or uncaring or ungenerous enough to not fund the schools what they need, then let that be on the heads of the alderman. But no, what happened regularly before and what was repeated under Mayor, to my surprise, under Mayor Craig, in this last budget discussion was, once again, we had the conversation that's gone on annually since the tax cap passed, which was, we are required by statute, by the tax cap, to submit a bill, a budget that falls under the tax cap. On a side note here, just to be very clear, the school board has spent your money and mine on 2 occasions in the past, and has paid an attorney to look at the ordinance, to look at the city charter, examine the tax cap law, and come back and say, does the school board have to meet the tax cap number? Does it have to supply a budget that is at the tax cap or not? Now, the mayor clearly has to. In the totality of all spending in the city, the charter requires a mayor to offer a budget that meets the tax cap, which is the rolling average of the preceding 3 years CPI number, Consumer Price Index number. The argument is that each individual department doesn't have to do that, and likewise the school board doesn't need to do that, but rather they offer budgets to the board, mayor, and alderman, or in the department heads' point of view, they offer budgets of what their requirements are for the year, and then in discussion with the mayor and others, they decide if they need to make cuts in order to meet the tax cap, then they cut down from there. But you start by saying, this is what we need in order to run our district or to run our department. The school board refuses to do that. So even after getting legal advice twice, it's not like they got it 5 times and 2 out of the 5 times the attorney said you don't need to do a tax cap. No, they've gone out for advice twice, and 100% of the time, on both occasions, they were told you do not have to meet the tax cap. You send the number to the school, to the board, mayor, and alderman. It's up to the board, mayor, and alderman. You tell them what you require in order to fund the schools, and the board, mayor, and alderman can decide, we can't make this work under the tax cap. We're going to have to find cuts. Well, once again, we got to good old City Hall in Manchester, where, it's like going through Alice through the looking glass, and thinking seems to be a little askew there, and we decided we would send over a budget for $168 million. Last year's budget was 167 something. A 1% increase would have been $1.7 million. So on 100, that should have made it should have been a 168.9 or something like that, close to $169 million is what that would be. But we sent over a budget less than that. So we're back to, ladies and gentlemen, we're back to in the city of Manchester deciding where the cuts should be. And what I don't understand is, I presume that our local, our mayor and our local members of the school board, mayor, and alderman actually, read the union leader, for instance. And if I were on the board of mayor and alderman, or if I were the mayor, or if I was on the school board, I take pride in things when I read the newspaper and I find out about, donors choose and a local company funds a load of schools, and I find out about the great things that some of our kids have done in schools, and even though I mightn't have done with it directly, I'm like, there you go, Manchester, look at what we can do, look at what we're doing, and we take a sense of pride. And I also, my pride would be dented when I'd pick up a newspaper and I'd look at a list of all the other towns in New Hampshire, and I go down, and as I go down through the 165 names, I'm thinking we must be here somewhere, it's coming soon. And I get, can you believe it, right at the bottom of the pile, annual spending per pupil, $11,591 on elementary school. 168-ish, whatever that number is. I'm not sure the exact. It's about 160 school districts, but last of last, bottom of the pile. And you'd think that just pride would cause these men and women, our elected officials, to say, this is not good enough for the great city of Manchester. We can't be talking about the things about what we're doing down in the mill buildings with Army and bringing new hotels and building to the city, and talk we're going to have a booming economy and it's a great place for business, and do all these things you want to do, and a vibrant nightlife, and stay, work, play New Hampshire, and bike Manchester, and all the great things that are going on. And you'd think that our public representatives would look at this number and say, this is the millstone around the neck of the city of Manchester when it comes to outside perception. We've been relying far too long on charities and on private companies, on the generosity of our teachers and administrators and the patience of our parents to put up with this. That we will not do it. And what I had expected, and as many of you who know me will know, that I supported Mayor Joyce Craig in her run for mayor, because of mainly on this topic, because I didn't think that the previous mayor had done right by education in the city. It was the primary area of my critique. And here I find that we go from a Republican mayor, Ted Gatsas, to a Democratic mayor, Mayor Joyce Craig, and I look at it and I say, if I had taken the words from this article and where Mayor Craig says something, and I put in Mayor Gatsas, there would have been very little difference. And one of the things that I really was annoyed with, and that's three reallys. Let me just say, it says, and the city's school systems rank in the bottom 10 when it comes to overall spending on education. Nashua is 10th from the bottom, spending an average of $12,693 per student this past school year. Manchester per pupil spending is dead last among the state's 150 plus school districts at $11,697 per student. And of course, this is elementary numbers he's using here. Nearly 1,000 less per student in Nashua. Quote, we have a tax cap, and I have to present a budget within the cap. The money we have in the city is limited. We have to do the best we can, said Mayor, guess? Joyce Craig, newly elected Democratic mayor of the city of Manchester. We have a tax cap, and I have to present a budget within the cap. The money we have in the city is limited. We have to do the best we can. She said, Mayor Joyce Craig. She spoke the same week that the school board recommended a school spending increase less than 2% next year, which stays within the city's tax cap. By the way, Nashua last year had an increase of 2.8%. We had 1.6%. And this year, the recommended from the school board and superintendent in Nashua is 3.8%, and we're at less than 2%. So they're doing something about moving out of the 10th bottom space. We're doing it's backwards we're going. So, let me see. In Nashua, school board recommended the schools. Yes. In Nashua, Superintendent Jamal Mosley said he will continue to advocate for Nashua public schools, and that includes asking for more funding. He recently recommended, I said 3.8. He recently recommended a 3.4% increase in school spending in the great city next year. The mayor had asked him to keep his increase to 2.5 or lower. The state median for per pupil spending is $16,672. So let me see. Manchester, $11,697. So, right, that's a $5,000 per student difference right there between Manchester and the state median. Now think about this. 15,000 students at $5,000 per student. That's $75 million. If we were to spend the state average, just the average, not the top, if we were to be in the middle of that 150, we'd be spending an additional $75 million. And now we're going to spend the next month and a half or 2 months in Manchester arguing over an additional $1.5 million on a budget of 167. And oh, by the way, we have 1,000 or more teachers, administrators, assistants, whatever else in the city, none of whom have contracts to go beyond the end of the school year. There's no funding in place anywhere. Their negotiations have just begun between the teachers and and the school district. There's no money anywhere to pay a cost of living increase or a 1% increase or anything for our teachers and subs, etc. We have. I talked to a lady last week who has a kid in kindergarten at Webster Middle School, and they can't get substitutes. And she called me frustrated because her child at kindergarten was in a class of 37 because the 3 classes had to be rolled into 2 because they couldn't find a sub. And this keeps happening, and her kid comes home crying because the kid just can't take the day in the room. As a kindergartner, a baby, as a day in a kindergartner with 37 kids and 1 teacher trying to manage them all, the kid just can't take it. So she just keeps the kid at home. That's Manchester 2018. That's not made up. That's a story from this current week, this past week, within the last 7 days. And in spite of that, we have a mayor who says that, well, she has to live within the tax cap. Now, I have no problem with Mayor Craig meeting the requirements of the charter and putting forward a budget that meets the tax cap. And if it were me, I'd put forward that budget and I'd say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm presenting you this piece of doo-doo budget that I have to present, because that's what the tax cap does. And I'm presenting it, and there it is. But if we do it, this is what we're going to do to our children on top of what we're doing here already. If the shoe were on a different foot here for a minute, if this was the police department or the fire department, and I don't wish them ill in any way, but if we had the most rusted fire trucks in the state of New Hampshire, if we had the least number of firefighters per truck in the state of New Hampshire, if we had the highest number of fires in the state of New Hampshire, if we had the longest amount of time of any other city in the state of New Hampshire for a response to 911 calls, if our response times for emergencies and health emergencies were the longest of any city in the state of New Hampshire, we'd all be shamed, and we would do something about it. We'd buy a new ambulance, we'd buy a new fire truck, we'd hire 2 new firefighters, we'd do something. But we have the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire. We spend less than everybody else. We have more children per class, per teacher, than every other town in the state of New Hampshire. And the response of our public officials, led by our new mayor, is we're going to go with the tax cap, and that's just what we have to do. Let me see what it says again. This is Mayor Joyce Craig. We have a tax cap, and I have to present a budget within the cap. The money we have in the city is limited because we chose to limit it. We have to do the best we can. And the best we can, Madam Mayor, is to stand up and tell the people what you know in your heart, that our schools are not funded properly and our kids are not getting what they ought to have, and that we should do an awful lot better. And as the leader of this city, you, Madam Mayor, should stand up and tell the people that. And that's what I would expect to see happen. It's what I would like to see happen. And I will admire you greatly, as will many more, if you actually do the job of leading the city, which you were elected to do, and come out boldly and tell the people what they need to hear. The state median. So, and here's the ringer for me. As a guy who supported Joyce Craig, she says, as quoted by the union leader, I'm not focused on that dollar figure. I'm focused on where we are today, Craig said, about the 11,697 per spending. She said Manchester schools had taken steps to improve education that won't bust the budget. No, they won't, because the district plans to expand grade banding concept piloted these last 2 years at Parker Varney School to other West Side elementary schools. Well, that's good. If we actually, that's the plan. It's not done yet, but if we actually do that, if we're able to get the things done, we can only do that if we can do something with the Northwest elementary school that's bursting at the seams. So it will require the changes proposed by Dr. Vargas. But here's what we hear. Organizations such as the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, Fun in the Sun, and Girls Inc. have committed to a summer reading program. Well, diddly doodle da, isn't that just fantastic? The YMCA. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? Come to Manchester, spend your money, build your house, pay your mortgage. Live in a beautiful city that's vibrant and happening. The largest city north of Boston, the gateway to the mountains and ski areas of New Hampshire, built on the shores, on the banks of the beautiful Merrimack River where the Armaskeag Falls are. And we'll have the YMCA look after your kids' reading needs, because our schools, we won't do it in our schools. We'll have 37 kids in the kindergarten class, but don't look over that thing. You can tell I'm a little cross about this. I'm very cross about this because I expect better. I expect better from people who know better. The Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, Fun in the Sun, and Girls Inc. have committed to a summer reading program. And Craig says she wants to re-examine a move taken several years ago to reduce the school year by 5 days. Wonderful. She also questions whether all students avail themselves of the opportunity and rigour that Manchester schools offer. Mayor Craig, you and I are going to have a little chat, because this isn't where it's meant to be at. It's one thing to turn around and do what you promised the voters to do, which you did, which you said, and people took you out there, and there were mean people who opposed you, who continually said that you wouldn't hold the tax cap, that you were going to be a tax and spender, and that you were going to go nuts on spending. And I understand the constraints on you. I understand how difficult it is when you're trying to hold the line fiscally and economically and do the right thing for the city. I fully understand that. I do know there are constraints. But in the end, our school district needs more funding. You, Madam Mayor, know it. The city everybody in the city knows it, or most reasonable people in the city know it. All the parents in the city know it. It's just, she also questioned whether all students avail themselves of the opportunity and rigour that Manchester schools offer. Well, we'll see how much rigour. I don't even want to address that because I'm at a loss for words, to be honest. I'm sure, there is a case, let's be clear. There is a case to be made for the fact that we have an inequality in our in the way, like in our AP courses, etc., that oftentimes minority kids, ethnically diverse kids, economically challenged kids, etc., are underrepresented in our AP or advanced placement classes. And that's a function of the fact, we have 57% free and reduced lunch in the city of Manchester. So we have a significant number of kids in our schools who have challenges economically. We have kids in our schools who've got social challenges, etc. And so there's a cultural thing that happens there about our advanced placement courses, etc., that it is right to point them at. But when you're spending less than everybody else, and you have less teachers to look after those kids than everybody else, and everybody sitting around the table knows that that's the case, and nobody was, well, in fairness, let me say, I didn't watch all the meeting. It was a long meeting, and some went on way too long. Art Beaudry did argue vociferously to send the Board of Mayor and Aldermen a budget that reflected the actual the level funding of this current year's school budget, and he was voted down. And I was very surprised at the people who voted him down. We've got a call coming in, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead, caller. Who's this?
Bob.
Bob, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
How can I help? What would you like to say, Bob?
I'd like to talk about the school budget.
Okay, good. Go right ahead.
I think we should appropriate more money for the schools. And Joyce Craig is only going to be a one-term mayor. And I believe that education really matters. And we should spend money on our kids more than what we're spending now.
Thank you.
I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate
Bye-bye.
that. Thank you for calling. And I presume you're a taxpayer in the city of Manchester? Okay, we just lost Bob. Thank you, Bob, for calling in. I appreciate that, and I presume you're a taxpayer in the city of Manchester, as am I. but it's just unconscionable where we are, and you know, I'd hate to think that my good friend, contrary to what you might believe by listening to me tonight, my good friend Joyce Craig, who I am very pleased that she was elected the first woman mayor of the city of Manchester, and I do understand her constraints, and I feel bad for her because I don't. It's not easy. But I expect more. In this area, this is an area I expect more. This is a place where I know, well, I can't get inside her head, but I'm pretty confident that she knows that this is a problem. And between this, and I've spent recent months, there's been a honeymoon period for the incoming school board and board of mayors and aldermen, etc., as they get their feet under the table, so to speak, and get engaged. But so I've spent a lot of time talking about what's going on in Concord, and Concord downshifting costs to the city of Manchester. And I have to say, I was reading a piece in the Union Leader today. I've spent some time in and out of Concord in recent weeks, and I was reading a piece today, which hope I can find it right here. I'm not sure if I kept it or not, but maybe not. Oh yes. So there was a piece in the Union Leader today, like an op-ed piece, that was talking about some bills, and just to give you an example of the kind of attack that public schools are under from some in the state of New Hampshire. And this is the thing that I expect, when we elect a more progressive people to office, I expect to hear the sound of the trumpet to be a little less shrill than it is from the people who vote for these things. So in the case of House Bill 1432, now, House Bill 1432, I'll be very quick with this, I want to go back to the city, but this is just this past week. In House Bill 1432, the bill would have required background checks from publicly funded private schools. Because, under what is school bill or Senate Bill 193, there's a proposal to take your money and mine, the taxpayers' money, and give it to wealthy academies, rich schools, private schools, religious schools, non-public schools, with no oversight. And oh, by the way, to bring in a private company that's going to manage that money, your money and mine, that we pay in taxes, and they're going to charge 5% to manage it. Well, we already have a state Department of Education. And it's my fiscally so-called conservative friends who are voting for that. But House Bill 1432, which didn't pass, would have required that any private schools receiving taxpayer money would be required to have criminal and background checks on their employees, and it would have required that they have non-discrimination policies, that they would not be allowed to discriminate on the basis of whatever the state-approved bases are. That bill was voted down by representatives here in the city of Manchester. Then we had House Bill 1650 as another example of a bill about education. This bill was to take the proposal is to remove the requirement for a family or parents to educate their children. Currently, on the current law, if you don't educate your children at all, it qualifies as neglect under the child neglect law. This bill was to remove that neglect requirement, so that from the neglect law. So in other words, if you had a child and under this privatization and homeschooling and let them stay at home and don't send them to schools at all, if you had children at home and somehow it was found out that you had a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 16-year-old at home who you'd never educated, and they couldn't add and subtract, and they couldn't read and they couldn't write. Under this Republican bill in the state of New Hampshire, you as a parent could no longer be charged with child neglect. That's what your public representatives spent their time last week on in Concord. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a joke is a joke. while you are going about your everyday lives and you're out at St. Patrick's Day in the afternoon queuing up to have, some meals in restaurants in Manchester, and when you're feeding your kids and driving your cars and trying to get, put one foot in front of the other every week, this is what your public representatives who stand in front of you and smile once every 2 years and say, we're going to hold the line on taxes, we're going to do the responsible thing. That's all they have to tell you. What they're really doing is things like, we're going to undo public education in the state of New Hampshire, and I'd like the people in Manchester who voted for this bill to eliminate the need to educate your children. Be very careful now, ladies and gentlemen. This was not a bill to have Big Brother stepping into your house and checking on your kids. There's no such provision. There is no oversight. If you decide today in the state of New Hampshire that you just say, I'm homeschooling my kids, we could know that you're living in close to squalor, that you are a person with zero education, that you've got an IQ of 12, and we could all suspect that and know all those things, and truancy officers could know it, and social workers could know it. There's not a thing anybody could do about it unless we could prove that you were actually neglecting your children. So even though we know that you don't send your kids to school anymore, they're living in semi-squalor in some hovel someplace, there's nothing that anybody in the state of New Hampshire can do about it, because our politicians have tied the hands of the Department of Education. They're not allowed to be involved in that topic anymore. Do whatever you want. Now, under Senate Bill 193, they want to not just allow that to happen, but they want to take your taxpayers' money and they want to spend it to give it to these people, so they can take money from the public schools and say, we're homeschooling. But oh no one's allowed to go and knock on the door and say, hey, did you actually educate the kids or not? And then in a separate action, this past week, and you can look it up, go online, look up HB 1650, and have a look at the faces and names of the people who voted to eliminate the need to educate your children from the definition of neglect in the state of New Hampshire. So anybody who thinks that, I don't come here on Tuesday nights just because, I want to, play around the edges and that this is unimportant and let's have a nice little chat about education for an hour and we'll all go home nicely. I do it because we have a ridiculous number of 400 public representatives in the House and another 30-odd, odds is the wrong number, senators, 27 or whatever it is. And our public representatives in Concord, a subset of them, are on a full-bore attack on public education. Just a few years ago, they've tried everything. They've tried numerous times, they've tried to redefine what an adequate education is in the state of New Hampshire. So, for instance, if you live in a town in New Hampshire and they don't offer foreign languages anymore, you can't sue, you can't go up to the State Board of Education and say my school board has taken away foreign languages, because it's not required. They wanted to make it reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is basically what the requirements are today. So anything else, you don't have it. You go up there as a parent, as an organization, or whatever, and people can feel sorry for you, but there's nothing can be done. But let me go back to our article in the Union Leader. So the piece that sort of, I won't say drove me over the edge, because I wasn't quite driven over the edge, but the piece that got me in when I looked at Joyce Craig's quote, as she was quoted here. There is the caveat that it's as she was quoted in the Union Leader, and it wasn't. I don't mean there was anything wrong here. I was misquoted a little. Some of the words were not quite what I said, and nothing. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. It's just, for instance, I talked about a foreign language program or whatever it was, and it wasn't a program. It was we hired 4 teachers to teach Spanish, but the piece that jumps off the page for me is that after looking at the article starts off with the numbers, and then Mayor Joyce Craig, her first comment is, we have a tax cap and I have to present the budget within the cap. The money we have in the city is limited. We have to do the best we can. I don't like the second half of those sentences, but what I would have expected to say is, look, as the mayor, I promised the people of Manchester that I would present a budget that's under the tax cap, because that's what's required by charter. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it, but that's what I'm going to do, because that's what I was elected to do. But and I will do what the voters want in the end. So if the Board of Mayor and Aldermen decides that that's okay, and they're okay with underfunding our schools, I, as the mayor, the chief executive of the city, I'll implement that budget, because that's what I promised I would do. But I'm not doing it without telling you to your face that this is a really stupid thing to be doing, that it's retrograde, that it's damaging the city, and not just the city as something written down in words on a wall or some sort of, ill-defined image of the city of Manchester. No, actual real boys and girls, with those little children you see walking into school, getting out of yellow buses every morning, those children, the actual children, as they walk up the pathways, the children of the citizens of Manchester are being damaged by this garbage going on. And as the mayor, I expect the mayor to stand up and say, that's what we should be doing. Just like as the CEO of a company, you say, we need to modernize our factory in Merrimack, because we're falling behind competitively and we're going to lose market share because our cost per unit is 1.5 times what it should be because our systems are out of date. We need to spend X number of dollars in order to improve our plant so that we can have more productivity. Therefore, over the long run, we're going to be more economical. We're going to actually save money. That's how you sometimes spend money, to save money. And that's what our competitors are doing. And if the board said, for one reason or another, we, the shareholders, we really want our dividend this year, and we're unwilling to give up any more of our dividend. We don't want to reinvest. We want to sweat the asset again. You're the CEO. Go make it happen. Well, at the board meeting, ladies and gentlemen, when we were finished our planning for the year, I'd say to them, I'm very unhappy about this, but I understand it. In the end, I work for you, the shareholders. You're the board. You represent the shareholders. And if you're telling me that this is what it has to be and we don't want to be more competitive, I will go and I will do a hell of a job trying to make us the best company we can be, make us economically as efficient as we can be. We'll try and eke out as many costs as we can in order to be competitive. But I will stand in front of them saying, but this is not the smart thing to be doing. Now, that's what I expect from the Chief Executive of the City of Manchester, Mayor Joyce Craig. I expect her to look at what she has about her and tell the people that this is not going to cut the mustard, ladies and gentlemen, and it's not fair. What I do not want to hear is we have a tax cap and I have to present the budget within the cap. The money we have in the city is limited. We have to do the best that we can. Madam Mayor, the City of Manchester is and the economy generally is doing fine right now. There might have been some excuse back in 2008 when the Bush administration and Congress had overseen the destruction of the U.S. economy. But now, what's the reason now? Let me have an incoming call. Go ahead, caller. And you are?
Hi, Jim. It's Sandy Paradise.
Hi, Sandy.
I just wanted to mention to you, I was very disappointed with the article.
Yep.
I thought it was pathetic that we had so far down to the bottom.
Yep.
Many years ago, we were up in the top. We were also up in the top with paying our teachers. And
right.
We were up in the top as far as, giving what we had to the schools. And like I say, I was disappointed with Joyce. And I looked at it and I said, this is pathetic. That's all I can say. And I agree with Art Beaudry. I've known Art for a long time. And, I mean, he's conservative, too.
Yep.
But I agree totally with him.
Yep.
And I agree totally with you. I don't understand any of this. All I can see is that the federal government, it's coming down from the federal government to the state to the local.
Right.
And we're going to end up paying for it, like you say.
Well, there you go. You're right. Thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. I just want to finish a few things before we come to an end here tonight.
Sure,
so I appreciate the
Go
call.
ahead.
It's always nice to hear from you.
I was very disappointed.
Well, I was a bit disappointed because the way it made, not that I'm accusing the union leader and the reporters of doing anything wrong, but just the pieces they chose to quote from me made it sound as though that I was, supporting and delighted with what was going on in our schools, and somehow all of a sudden I was okay, and I wasn't.
You know what? Some of the people from our outskirts, Goffstown, Bedford, and so on, New Boston, and everything. I met a few of them the other day after church, and they said, "Are you people going backwards instead of forward?" And I looked at them and I said, "Unfortunately, if you read that article, yes."
Yep.
That's all I
Yep.
can say. I'll
It
let
is.
you
All right.
finish, Jim.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the call. We'll talk soon. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you for calling. There's a lady who knows that of which she speaks, an educator in Manchester for many years. So I understand. I'm not a Martian. I didn't land out of a balloon someplace, and don't understand the realpolitik of this. I understand the realpolitik of this. I know exactly where it is. It's very easy for some people in this city to say Joyce Craig is a tax and spender and she's going to tax us out and then she ends up being a one-term mayor because if she goes ahead and finds another $4 or $5 million for schools and actually fixes some of the things that need to be fixed. Gill Stadium. I talked to a coach last week about Gill Stadium. What's going to happen with Gill Stadium? Now, we had the surface done at West High School, but the surface at Gill Stadium is close to unplayable. It's actually dangerous, and it needs to be replaced. Now, your kid or mine might, lose a knee, or get seriously injured playing some sport on there this year, and all 28 members of our two boards and our mayor seem to be fine with that. I don't know if all of them are, but there's no one on the school board saying, we need to do something with, we need better funding for this. On our sports curriculum, we have a halftime athletic director. We have the programs for kids on special needs kids and etc. The programs are completely lacking. Remedial reading, etc. All of it. There's holes in the budget everywhere, and and we're scrimping and scraping around. And we have BJ's Wholesale Club donating stuff. And at Hillside Middle School, where I spent quite a bit of time, there's like a line of people constantly offering their support. I go over to one of the high schools, and you have parents arriving with their baking cookies to sell and donating ice cream or donating cookies or something, or it's constantly this yard sale, bake sale. Let's put a sign up and have some private company advertise in the corner of the gym, and this is how we have to do it, and it's embarrassing. And it's embarrassing, the great schools that we have in Manchester, especially our high schools with their great traditions. West High School, Memorial High School, and the oldest high school in the state, public high school in the state of New Hampshire, Central High School. Those are wonderful schools with long histories. And people have great pride in those schools. And to see them today underfunded, ill-equipped, undermanned, lacking the resources that they deserve to have, it's shocking. And when our kids get on a bus and they travel to, I've mentioned many times, the new high school in Dover, when that new high school is finished, or when they go to the new high school in Nashua and they walk in with the indoor track and the two gyms, not one, and the training area and the labs and the congregation spaces and the collaborative spaces, and and everything is new and neat, and what do you think it does to them? I don't want to go on and on about it. I'm not here to run down Manchester's schools that much. I'm just appalled that this is where we are and this is where we've gotten to. We have a new administration with a new mayor. My point is, if I haven't made it very clear tonight, I expect a lot better and a lot more. This is not good enough. I don't think it's what the people who voted for Joyce Craig in large numbers, this is not what they voted for. This is not what they expected, and it's not what they wanted. They did expect fiscal rectitude, to be prudent in the spending of the public purse, to be looking for savings wherever they can be found. But where there is a need, the need should be funded. There's enough people in this city who are saying we won't spend a dime on your kids because we don't care, because they send their kids to private schools anyway. We have enough public representatives doing that. I expect public representatives with their kids in the school system to step up and make sure that our kids and our schools have the resources that they need. There's no reason why we should be at the bottom of the pile. And when people go and they pick up their Sunday newspaper and they look down through the list of schools and they find at the bottom of one column Manchester, and the bottom of the next column Manchester, and the bottom of the next column Manchester, you'd think that they get a little embarrassed, a little angry, and say, I'm going down to City Hall and I'm going to vote the right way next week. Ladies and gentlemen, please call up the mayor, call up your public representatives, and let them know we need to do the right thing by education in the city of Manchester. Thank you. Don't forget the St. Patrick's Day Parade next week, the 25th. Have a great time. See you all next Sunday, and then again here next Tuesday night. Thanks and good night.